There is a thing the old teen do with their hands when a man is past saving. They turn the palms up and lower them slow, like setting down something heavy they have carried a long way. They had a word for it too, but I learned the gesture first, because on Ashfall the gesture came before the word every time. You saw the hands go down, and you knew, before any translation came over the link, that somebody you had been eating beside that morning had just been written out of the world. I was 23. They called me Doc, the way they call every corpsman Doc, and I had been a corpsman for 14 months, which on Ashfall made me old. The men who had taught me were already gone or already home with parts missing, and I had inherited a med station the size of a tool shed dug into the back slope of a ridge we called the Reach, and a call sign, Kettle, and an old yellow dog named Murphy who was not technically supposed to be there at all. I want to tell it plainly, because the way people tell it now has gotten away from the truth. They make it loud. They make Murphy into something he was not. I have heard a version where he came across that flat like a thunderclap, and a version where he tore the gun crew apart, and a version where the light changed and the angels came down, and none of those are what happened. What happened was quieter than any of that, and worse, and in the end better, and I am the only one left who was standing at the lip of that hole when it did, so I will tell it the way it went. Murphy belonged to a sergeant named Pell, who is also gone now, and who had brought the dog up from the rear against every regulation there is because Pell could not stand to leave him behind and nobody with the authority to stop him had the heart. Murphy was 11 years old when I knew him. He was going gray around the muzzle and white in the eyebrows, and his hips were bad, and he slept 18 hours a day, and he had the calmest eyes I have ever seen on any living thing. He was the kind of dog you forget is in the room until you reach down without looking, and your hand finds the top of his head, warm, waiting, like he had known your hand was coming before you did. He was a working dog once back on Earth, the kind that finds people in rubble and snow. You could see it sometimes, the old training surfacing under the gray. He would lift his head off his paws when a man's breathing changed across the dugout, and he would get up, slow, joints clicking, and go lie down next to whoever it was and put his chin on them and not move. I have watched men I could do nothing more for go quiet under that chin. I have no science for it. I only know it happened more than once, and I stopped questioning it. The old teen did not understand him at all. You have to know what the old teen were to understand the rest. They were our allies, and they were good ones, and I owe my life to a few of them by name. But they were a careful people, careful the way water is careful, finding always the lowest and safest channel, and they had been at war so long that their whole civilization had folded itself down into doctrine, the way a man who has been cold his whole life folds himself down small to keep his heat. They were tall and gray-skinned and slow-moving, with long, careful hands and faces that did not show much, and they fought by a book so old and so complete that there was a line in it for everything. There was a line for when to advance and a line for when to hold and a line, the one that matters here, for when a body on the wrong side of the fire stopped being a man to be saved and started being a loss to be mourned. They called it being given to the field. When the cost of reaching a casualty exceeded the casualty's likely worth, they had numbers for this, real numbers. A man's expected remaining service weighed against the probable price in others to drag him out. The field claimed him, and you did not go. You turned your palms up and you set him down and you grieved him properly later with their long, sad music, and you did not lose a second man chasing the first. It was not cowardice. I want to be fair to them. In 10,000 years of war it was probably wisdom. It had kept them alive as a people when fiercer races had spent themselves to nothing. But it was a door that, once a man went through it, did not open again, and I watched it close on Beck on the 11th day, and I will hate that door until I die. The 11th day was the withdrawal. We had held the Reach for 3 weeks longer than anyone thought we could, and then the order came down to give it up, because something larger had shifted somewhere I could not see and the whole front was folding back. And a thing nobody tells you about a withdrawal is that it is more dangerous than the fight that came before. You are moving. You are exposed. The enemy, who we mostly never saw and only called the Raiders, the loose murderous coalition of clans and warbands that had been bleeding this world for a generation. The Raiders smelled it the way they always smelled it, and they came up onto the far slope with their guns, and they began to make the open ground between the reach and the rear into a killing floor. There was a flat. That is the word we used. The flat, though it was not really flat, it rolled and folded the way old ground does. But from where we sat it read as one long open stretch of pale dust maybe 400 meters across, with the reach on our side and the cut where the road bent into cover on the far side, and the Raiders' guns up on the slope above it with a clean line down the whole length. To get the column out we had to cross it. We crossed it in rushes, vehicles first under smoke, then the men in bounds, and it cost us, but we were getting them across, and I was at Kettle on the friendly lip patching what came back and sending it rearward, and Murphy was asleep against the sandbags with one ear half up the way he slept, and for about 2 hours it was working. Then the smoke generator on the third truck took a round and died, and the wind, which had been with us, turned, and a whole squad caught the open at the wrong moment. Most of them made it. That is the thing about it that I could not stop turning over afterward. Most of them made it. It was nearly a clean crossing, and if the wind had held 30 more seconds, it would have been a story nobody told. But the smoke thinned at the worst place, and the guns found the last bound, and 4 men went down on the flat, and 3 of them did not move again, and the 4th one did. The 4th one was Beck. I did not know him well. He was 19. A private from somewhere with corn. He had told me once while I was tapping his ankle, somewhere flat and green with corn in it as far as you could see, and he had wanted off it his whole life, and now he wanted nothing on this earth or any other so much as to be standing in it. He had a wide plain face and ears that stuck out, and he laughed too loud at things that were not funny, because he was scared all the time and trying not to show it, the way they all were at 19. He went down about 2/3 of the way across, in the open, in a fold of ground that gave him just enough cover to be alive and not enough to be safe. And through the long lens, I watched him drag himself into that fold and pull his leg in after him and lift one arm once and then keep it down, because lifting it drew fire. He was alive. That was the thing. He was clearly, visibly alive, and he was 400 meters from me. And the dust kicked up in a steady walking line every time anything on our side so much as showed a helmet over the lip, and I stood there with my hands already moving toward my bag before my brain had caught up to the fact that there was no way across. The platoon sergeant, a hard, quiet man named Akanjo, was already on the radio. I heard him calling for smoke, for suppression, for anything that would let a team go. And I heard the answer come back, our own command and the Ultine fire control both, and the answer was that there was nothing to give. The artillery was displacing rearward and out of action. The air was committed elsewhere. The smoke was gone with the truck. The Raiders had the high ground and good guns and a clean field, and any team that went out onto that flat would not reach Beck, would not get halfway, would simply add itself to the 3 who already were not moving. I remember Akanjo lowering the handset and looking at the flat for a long time. And I remember the Ultine. There was an Ultine liaison attached to us, a sub-marshal named Tavrek, who I had come to respect in the careful way you respect somebody whose courage runs on rails so different from your own that you can barely recognize it as the same thing. He was old for one of them, gray going to a kind of pale slate, with a long scar down one side of his face that he never explained, and a way of standing so still you forgot he was tall. He came up beside Akanjo, and he looked at the flat and at Beck in his fold, and he did a calculation I could see moving behind his eyes, and then he turned his long hands palm up and lowered them slow, and set Beck down. "He is given to the field," Tavrek said. The link rendered it flat and gentle. "I am sorry, Sergeant. The crossing cannot be made. To send men is to give the field more than it has asked. We will hold here and cover the column, and we will remember him." "He's alive," I said. I had not meant to say anything. It came out of me sideways. "Sir, he's alive. I can see him breathing. He's in the fold if we can just—" Tavrek looked at me, not unkindly. That was the part I could not forgive at first and came much later to understand. There was nothing cold in his face. He was grieving already. He had simply done the math, and the math was the math. "I know he is alive, doctor," he said. "That is what makes it hard. If he were dead it would cost us nothing to leave him and we would not feel it. The field asks for the living. It always has." He paused. "On my world there is a prayer for this. It is a good prayer. I will teach it to you tonight if you wish." I did not want his prayer. I wanted a smoke round and a fast truck and somebody to tell me to go. I looked at Akanjo, and Akanjo looked at me, and Akanjo was a good man in an impossible place. And what he said was, "Doc, Doc, look at me. Look at the ground. You go out there, I lose you and I lose him both, and I've got 80 more men to get across this thing tonight, every one of them somebody's beck. You hear me? Stand down." I heard him. God help me. I heard him, and I stood down, and I have spent more nights than I will admit standing back up in that moment in my head, and going anyway and dying on the flat next to those three who were not moving, because some part of me has never been sure that the man who stood down was the better man. It was while I was standing there, hatting myself, that Murphy woke up. I did not see what woke him. Maybe it was Beck. The dog had a thing, I told you, for the sound of breathing going wrong, and Beck was 400 meters off, but the wind had come back around to us, and maybe, I do not know, maybe across all that distance the old dog heard something in the rhythm of a frightened boy bleeding into the dust that the rest of us could not. Or maybe it was just that the dugout had gone quiet and tense in a way that pulled him up out of sleep. I only know that I felt him before I saw him, that warm weight leaning against the back of my leg, and I looked down and Murphy was on his feet. He was looking at the flat. He was not agitated. I want to be clear about that because of all the lies that got told later. This is the one that bothers me most. The idea that he was frantic, that he was straining at something, that there was drama in him. There was none. He stood there with his bad hips and his gray muzzle and his ears half forward, and he looked out across 400 meters of ground that was killing men, and his tail moved once slow, the way it did when he had decided something. And then he looked up at me, just once, with those calm brown eyes. I have tried for years to say what was in that look, and I cannot, because it was not a human thing, and I will not pretend it was. It was not asking permission. Dogs do ask permission. I had seen Murphy ask for plenty. This was not that. It was closer to the look he gave you when he was already doing the thing and was only letting you know, as a courtesy, that he was going to do it. The look of an old hand who has seen the situation, knows his job, and is informing the room. Then he walked to the lip. Tavrek made a sound. I had never heard an Olteen make a sound like that, a kind of low click of alarm, and his long hand came out toward the dog, and he said something the link did not bother to translate, and one of his aides moved to grab Murphy by the loose skin of the neck. Murphy was not there. He did not flinch or dodge dramatically. He simply was not where the hand closed, the way an old dog who has spent his whole life among people's careless hands knows exactly how much room he needs and takes it. He stepped down over the lip of the hole, out past the sandbags, out onto the open edge of the flat, and the gun on the far slope, which had been walking its line back and forth across our positions, paused. I think I have thought about this for a long time. I think it paused because what came out of the friendly position was not a man. The raiders were good with their guns, and they were watching for men, for the shape and pace and panic of men. And what stepped out into the gray dust was low and slow and unhurried, and entirely the wrong shape. And for 1/2 of 1 second the gunner up on that slope simply did not know what he was looking at, and did not fire. And in that half second, Murphy was already gone off the skyline and down into the first fold of ground. Here is the part I can only tell you as I saw it, which is in pieces, because I was watching through a fieldglass with my heart going like a hammer, and Tavrek beside me gone rigid and silent, and the whole dugout holding its breath. Murphy did not run across the flat. If he had run across the flat, he would have died on the flat, the way the runners died, the way anything that crosses open ground in a straight fast line dies. What he did was older than running. He read the ground. That 400 meters that looked flat to us, that read as one open killing stretched through our human eyes and through the Olteen's instruments, was not flat to him at all. It was a landscape of folds and dips and dead angles, of places where the dust had drifted into low spines and places where old shell holes pocked the surface, of a whole hidden country of cover that you could only see if you were 11 inches off the ground and had spent a life learning that the world is mostly made of places to be unseen. He moved from one piece of it to the next. He would flow down into a fold and along it, low, his belly nearly in the dust, that gray muzzle steady, and he would come to the end of the fold where it ran out into open, and he would stop. He would lie still. He would wait. And the gun would walk its line, searching, finding nothing, and there would be a lull in it, a held breath while the gunner shifted or scanned. And in that lull Murphy would cross the open patch in a low scuttle that did not look fast and somehow ate the ground, and drop into the next fold before the gun came back around. He timed it. I do not have another word. He read the rhythm of that gun the way he read the rhythm of a man's breathing in the dugout, the lulls and the bursts, and he laid himself into the spaces between, and the spaces were small and the consequences of misjudging them were absolute, and he did not misjudge them. Not once. Beside me Tavrek had stopped breathing. I could hear it, the absence of it. He had his instrument up, the Olteen reckoning device that did the field's terrible arithmetic, and I glanced at him, and the device was showing the same thing it had shown for Beck, the same impossible cost, the same verdict, and the dog was halfway across it. That cannot, Tavrek said. The link gave it to me bare like that, unfinished. That is not a survivable line. Nothing crosses that line. We have crossed that line 10,000 times in 10,000 places and nothing. He stopped. He lowered the device. He watched with his naked eyes. A burst caught the fold Murphy had just left. The dust jumped up in that hard walking line, right through the spine of ground where he had been lying a breath before, and a man in the dugout made a small broken noise, and I think it was me. But the dog was already 2 folds on, flowing low through the dead ground, gray and patient and entirely calm, and the gun was firing at where he had been because the gunner was tracking him the way you track a man, leading the place where a frightened thing should be, and Murphy was not a frightened thing, and did not go where fear would have sent him. He went where the ground was. It took him a long time. That is another thing the loud versions get wrong. They make it quick, a dash, a heartbeat. It was not quick. It was the slowest 15 minutes of my life. He crossed 400 meters of killing ground at the pace of an old gray dog with bad hips, reading every inch of it. And every foot of it was a decision. And he made every decision right. And at the end of it, he came up out of the last fold below where Beck lay in his hollow, and he went to the boy, and he lay down beside him, and he put his chin on him, and he did not move. I heard Beck over the radio. Akanjo had a man on Beck's freak still, hopping, and we all heard it. The boy's voice come up cracked and disbelieving out of the speaker. "There's a dog," Beck said. "Doc, there's a dog, there's Murphy, Murphy's here. Oh God, Murph, oh good boy, oh you good boy." And then he was crying, the way a 19-year-old cries when he had made his peace with dying alone in the dust on a world full of corn that was not his world's corn, and a thing he loved had come across the impossible to lie down next to him, so he would not be alone. And I am not ashamed to say the whole dugout was wet-eyed, the hard men and the soft ones, all of us. And Tavrek stood there with his long gray face, and a wetness in his own strange eyes that I did not know his kind could make. But here is the thing. Murphy had not come to die there with him. That would have been a beautiful, useless thing, and Murphy was a working dog, and working dogs do not do the beautiful, useless thing. He had come to bring him home. He lay there with his chin on Beck maybe a minute, no more, the way he lay with the dying in the dugout. and I understand now that it was not comfort, or not only comfort. It was assessment. It was the old rubble and snow training, reading the boy through contact, finding the wound, finding the breath, finding out whether this one could be moved. And then he got up, and he took the strap of Beck's harness in his teeth, the load-bearing strap across the boy's chest, the one built to take a man's whole weight when they hauled him from a vehicle, and he began, slowly, to pull. I have read what the experts said later about whether a dog that age and size could move a grown man in gear across that ground, and the experts said a great many things, and I was there and the experts were not. He moved him. Not in a straight line, never in a straight line. The dog never once forgot the gun even with a man in his teeth. But fold to fold, dead angle to dead angle. The same hidden country he had used coming out he now used going back. Except now he was hauling a 170-pound boy who could help only a little, pushing with his good leg when he could, and mostly just holding on to the dog's collar with both hands and trusting, the way I have never seen a man trust anything. That the animal knew the way. And Beck talked to him the whole way. We heard it. Easy, Murph. Easy, buddy. I got you, you got me. Easy now. The boy soothing the dog and the dog hauling the boy. The two of them low in the dust under the guns, and the gun on the slope firing and firing into the places where men would have been and finding only the empty folds the dog had already left. There was a moment near the end. The last open stretch, the worst one, the 40 meters of bare ground right below our lip where there was no fold deep enough to hide a man and a dog together, and Murphy stopped at the edge of it in the last cover and lay down, and held the boy and waited. And the gun walked its line. And I understood what he was doing. We all did. He was reading the rhythm one last time, the lulls and the bursts, and the last stretch was too long to cross in one lull with a wounded man dragging. And the old dog lay there in the dust with the boy's life in his teeth, and waited for a gap that I was not sure would ever come. And Tavrek moved. I told you the Olteen had a line for everything. I told you their whole people had folded down into doctrine to survive. What I did not yet understand, standing there, was that the doctrine was not the bottom of them. The doctrine was the wall they had built because they had needed a wall. And I watched an old gray sub-marshal with a scar he never explained look at a dying world, and a doomed boy, and an impossible dog who would not accept the arithmetic. And I watched something behind his eyes that had been folded down for 10,000 years stand up. Cover, Tavrek said, not to me, to his own. The link could barely keep up with him. He was giving orders in the old battle speech of his kind, fast and hard, and his aides moved, and the Olteen on our line, who had been holding their fire to keep our position hidden, who by every page of their book should have kept holding it, opened up. Not at Beck's slope. At the far slope, the gun, the raiders, all of it. Every weapon the Olteen had on that line poured itself up at that ridge in a long, roaring sheet that I had never heard them make because their book did not permit the waste of it. And the gun on the slope stopped walking its patient line and ducked, because even fanatics duck. And in the gap that opened, Murphy stood up out of the last fold with the boy's strap in his teeth, and hauled him the last 40 meters across the bare ground, while the whole Olteen line screamed fire over their heads. Hands came down over the lip. A dozen hands, human and Olteen both, mine among them, and we got Beck by the harness and the arms and the collar of his blouse, and we hauled him up and over and down into the hole, and the dog came up and over after him on his own 4 legs, slow, gray dust to the eyebrows, and stood there in the bottom of the dugout among all of us with his sides heaving, and his tail moved once, slow. And then he walked over to Beck, who was down on the floor of the hole with 3 of us already on him, my hands already in his leg, the boy white and shocked and alive, and Murphy lay down next to him and put his chin on him, and let out a long breath and closed his eyes. His job done. The way he had closed them 10,000 times against the sandbags in the long afternoons, an old dog who needed his sleep. I worked on Beck for a long time. The leg was bad, but it was a leg, and a leg you can save, and I saved it, or the surgeons in the rear did with what I bought them. He kept one hand on the dog the whole time. Even out of his head with the shock and the morphine, he kept one hand buried in the fur of Murphy's neck, and the dog let him and slept. I did not say anything to Tavrek for a while. There was too much to do. But when it was done, when Beck was bagged and tagged and on a truck rearward with a real chance, when the column was moving again and the worst of it was past, I found the sub-marshal standing at the lip looking out at the flat in the failing light, at the three who were not moving and whom we would go back for now, under cover of dark, because the line had shifted in everyone's chest, and I stood next to him, and for a while neither of us said anything. "You broke your book," I said finally. He was quiet. Then he said through the link in that gentle flat rendering that could not carry what was in his actual voice, "We have a line for the dog now. We will have to write it. We did not have one before." He looked down at Murphy, who had followed me up to the lip and was leaning against my leg, gray and warm and half asleep on his feet. "We had a word for the ground that claims the living, given to the field. We have used it for 10,000 years, and it was true for 10,000 years." He paused for a long time. "Your animal did not believe in it. He went out onto the line that claims the living, and he did not ask the cost, and the line did not claim him. And I have watched your animal do in 15 minutes a thing that my whole people decided long ago could not be done, because we were wise, and being wise we stopped trying, and not trying we never learned that we were wrong." I did not know what to say to that. I am still not sure there was anything to say. "On my world," Tavrek said, "we will teach the young that there is a kind of courage that does not do arithmetic. We did not believe it existed. We thought it was a story the fierce races told to make their dead feel chosen. We were wrong." It walked across the field in front of me with bad legs and a gray face, and it brought back the boy the field had already taken, and it did not even understand that it had done something impossible, because to the animal it was not impossible. It was only far, and there was someone at the end of it who needed him. He turned his long gray face to me. "What is the word for it? In your tongue. The thing the animal is." I looked down at Murphy. He had given up on standing and laying down on my boots, all his weight on my feet, the way he did, warm and heavy and entirely at peace. An old yellow dog who had crossed 400 meters of killing ground to bring a frightened boy home, and now needed nothing in the world but to sleep on somebody's feet. "Loyal," I said. "We call it loyal." Tavrek tried the word in his own mouth. It came out wrong, the way our words always came out wrong in theirs, with the wrong weight on it, but he said it again, more carefully, fixing it in himself the way I had seen him fix the names of the dead so he would not forget them. Then he turned his palms up and lowered them, slow, the gesture I had learned before the word, the gesture for setting down the heavy thing you have carried a long way. Except he was not setting down a man. He was setting down the book. I understood that, watching him. He was putting the old arithmetic on the ground at last, gently, the way you set down something that has served you faithfully and is finally done. We got the three off the flat that night, the ones who were not moving so their people could have them properly. We finished the withdrawal. The Reach fell behind us and Ashfall fell behind us in time, and the whole long war ground on to its end the way wars do, slow and stupid, and far from any of the reasons men had started it. Pell did not make it home. A lot of them did not. But Beck did. Beck went home to his corn on a leg that worked, and he wrote me a letter every year on the date for the rest of Murphy's life, and then for the rest of Murphy's death. And the letters always said the same thing in different words, which was thank you, and I always wrote back the same thing, which was do not thank me, thank the dog. I only stood there. Because that is the truth of it, and I have wanted to set it down plainly while there is still somebody to set it down. The smart men had run the numbers, and the numbers were right. The crossing could not be made by anyone who did the arithmetic. The brave men were ready to die making it and would have, and it would have changed nothing, and Akanjo was right to hold them. An entire careful ancient civilization had a word for that ground, and the word was true. And an old yellow dog with bad hips who slept 18 hours a day, who did not know what a number was, who could not have told you the cost of anything, got up off the sandbags because somewhere out in the dust, a boy's breathing had gone wrong, and he read the ground, and he found the gaps, and he went out across the line that claims the living and brought back the one it had already taken, and then he lay down on my feet and went asleep. And I do not think it ever once occurred to him that he had done anything at all. That is the thing I would have you understand, if you understand nothing else. It was not loud. There was no thunder in it. There was just an old dog who loved a frightened boy more than he believed in arithmetic and crossed. We buried Murphy years later under a tree, at home, on Pell's people's land, because it was the closest thing he had to a home and they were glad to have him. Beck came. Half a dozen of the others who were left came. And an old Olteen came too, slow and gray and stooped now with a scar down one side of his face, all the long way across the dark from a world that has a line in its book now for a kind of courage that does not do arithmetic, and stood by the small grave under the tree with his long, careful hands turned up, and lowered them slow, setting down the heavy thing he had carried all that way. I have seen brave men. I have patched more of them than I can count and stood over the ones I could not patch, and I know what courage looks like in the human shape. But the truest thing I ever saw on any world, the thing I will hold in front of me when my own field finally comes to claim me, was not a man at all. It was a tired old dog deciding that far was not the same as impossible, and going anyway, because someone he loved was at the other end of it and needed him, and the arithmetic could go to hell. He was a good boy, the best one, and he came back.